When we fall in love, everything else seems to become rather meaningless. We feel like we're going through something so special that nobody else can possibly understand it. Except, it seems like many of us at some point in our lives actually feel that way. So what does that mean? Is the love that we feel something unique and special, or is it something common and predictable and even universal? So let us make a thought experiment. Imagine you're madly in love. You just cannot stop thinking about this person. Whenever you see them, you panic because it feels like your whole life is at stake. If only you could just hold them in your arms and give them that life-changing kiss. The void in the middle of your being will be filled with true love, and you will be complete. Well, that's what you think anyway. But let us imagine further that you end up going on a date with this person, a candlelight dinner, wine, delicious food, and after a few enchanting hours, the moment you've been waiting for finally arrives. You tilt your head slightly to one side and start leaning forward. But right at that moment, something entirely unexpected happens. Your date leans back and away from you. Don't get this wrong, they say, but I'm not into kissing. And you say, excuse me, what? And then they explain. You see, they grew up in a different culture where people did not kiss mouth to mouth. And surely enough, they themselves never got interested in this strange practice either. And frankly, given the fact that there are more germs in your mouth than, your rectal area, they kind of find the whole thing revolting. At that point, you are officially speechless. Another minute of awkward silence, and your date finally asks you directly, will you accept them as who they really are? Will you give them a chance? Now, I suspect that you might have found this hypothetical story too far-fetched. A culture of non-kissers? How is that even a thing, right? Well, according to a recent anthropological survey, the majority of the cultures in the world actually do not practice mouth-to-mouth kissing. You did not see that one coming, did you? So my question for you is, could you give this hypothetical non-kisser a shot? Do you think they could love you the way you want to be loved? In fact, do you even think that they're capable of romantic love at all? If your answer is yes, you could go ahead and give your heart to this person. Hats off to you. I think you're one enlightened individual. But if your answer is no, like mine would be, I think we have some thinking to do. Isn't love supposed to be unconditional? Something that overcomes all obstacles? Love conquers all, right? But what if it doesn't? Then what? Is love not what we think it is? Is it not something universal? Well, if something is universal, it needs to apply to everybody everywhere. And details aside, there are basically two ways in which that can happen. Either an unchangeable human nature makes this thing called love possible, that is to say, the animal within us, or love is some kind of a metaphysical essence that comes to us from beyond, from outside of the messy domain of human realities. Can we understand love in either of these ways then? My answer is straightforward. No. Love is neither animal nor divine, but entirely human. How we experience intimacy and how we attach meaning to those experiences are things that are neither biological nor metaphysical, but deeply cultural. Now, I'm a cultural anthropologist, and anthropology is the study of cultures. And I also happen to be a follower of Friedrich Nietzsche, the great 19th century philosopher. So why is anthropology relevant here? Like I said, anthropology is the study of culture, and I just claimed that romantic love is something that is deeply cultural. Culture is a system of meanings and a framework for actions. In any given cultural context, we find all kinds of assumptions and prejudices that are not immediately available to individuals. Example, well, kissing on the mouth. The act itself becomes meaningful only within a cultural context, and yet we perceive that meaning to be inherent and natural. Similarly, we perceive our own experiences to happen without any sort of mediation, except it is actually culture that allows us to understand and narrate our experiences to ourselves and others. Which brings us to language. For us, our thoughts are private and internal, but thinking can only happen within a cultural framework and a particular language. And language is collective and external. Without language, we could not even identify and categorize the sensations in our bodies, such things as what we call our moods or emotions, let alone contemplating their meaning and significance. In short, even the most immediate physical experiences can only become meaningful and significant within a cultural and linguistic framework. This perspective is crucial for understanding human realities, and yet it is entirely ignored by both the biological and metaphysical approaches to love. Let's go one by one. The biological approach to love sees our passions and affections as predictably physiological. If that is true, we are at the mercy of things that are happening in our bodies which we don't have any kind of control over. And it's only another step from there to the conclusion that we need to protect ourselves from ourselves and domesticate the animal within. And incidentally, this is what happens with the biology of love when it's turned into commercialized relationship advice through online dating sites and popular media. As for the science behind this approach, recently researchers used MRI machines and found that the part of the brain that lights up when we experience intensely passionate feelings for another is not the part that is responsible for higher cognitive functions, but rather the part of the brain that is the most ancient and primitive part, which is sometimes dubbed the lizard brain. That is to say, not our consciousness, but somewhere much more primal. And this led to the conclusion that romantic love is something that's designed by nature for the purposes of reproduction. Notice, first of all, how this perspective disregards non-heterosexual forms of love, which we find in all kinds of varieties around the world. If romantic love is a biological thing that, that is geared towards reproduction, anything outside of heterosexual desires and affections can only be understood as deviations from the true intentions of Mother Nature. Something like not true love, but false love? Is that how we're supposed to think? Secondly, trying to understand and explain something as deeply personal and culturally immersed as love with the chemicals in our bodies is akin to explaining your Thanksgiving dinner with the enzymes in your stomach. Clearly, biology is what makes culture possible. We are intensely and fundamentally cultural and social beings. We are the storytelling animal. And for that kind of stuff to happen, we clearly need cognitive and linguistic faculties, which are a part of our biological makeup. But that doesn't mean that biology can explain our stories themselves or the meanings of our lives. Culture is not some sort of an ornamental add-on to biology. It is fundamental to human existence. Just like the spider cannot exist without its web, we cannot exist outside of our cultural frameworks either. In short, our neurochemical processes might work more or less the same for all of us. But to argue that the lizard is the true artist behind millennia of art, music, and literature across the world, as well as the grand architect of a practical infinity of human experiences, is slightly far-fetched, I would say. Okay, enough with the lizard now. Let's talk about soulmates and those matches that are made in heaven. Now, I already mentioned how culture sets up assumptions and beliefs that are not visible to individuals who tend to take them for granted to be normal and natural. And our cultural understanding of romantic love is a case in point. We tend to assume that true love comes straight out of the heart with feelings that are pure, innocent, and unconditional. But at the same time, somehow it is also carnal. It's all about sex and desires and passion. Needless to say, it entails deep compatibility and friendship. And if it's meant to be, all of that stuff comes together in the form of happily ever after, which then allows us to make babies and raise them as a family. And after all is said and done, true love is a lifelong commitment till death do us apart. This, in a nutshell, is our cultural script. But the thing is, nothing of this sort existed anywhere in the world until the 19th century. That is to say, far from being universal, this actually is a very specific cultural construct. The problem is, such grand hopes and expectations are hardly achievable for the flawed and contradictory creatures that we are. And that is enough already to set us on a path of misery and disappointment. And the second thing is, this script is endlessly enacted within a context that already sets up millions of people on a path to misery and disappointment. In modern consumerist societies, the breaking down of traditional bonds of belonging has left vast numbers of people alone in facing social alienation. How widespread depression has become is no secret. And recent research shows that loneliness is becoming an epidemic and killing more people than obesity. In fact, the problem is so acute that Britain has just recently created a ministry of loneliness. Is it any wonder then that dream of finding that one soulmate who is going to magically change everything and make our lives complete is such a pervasive idea? Our impossibly idealized script of love is what an anthropologist would call a myth, a collectively shared fiction that contains and sustains a fundamental set of contradictions about a given society. According to recent research, Americans cite romantic love as the most important reason to get married. And they just do that. Taking this loaded idea as the foundation of their union, they feed a multi-billion-dollar marriage industry and get married till death does them apart. And in about half of those marriages, it's actually not death, but divorce that does the parting. Concepts are the graveyards of perception, as Nietzsche put it, because they're based on the equation of unequal things. When I say tree, you immediately think you know what I'm talking about. But do you? No two trees are the same, and yet we have a single concept that accounts for all of them. The same is true for women, for example, or Muslim, or black, or immigrant. One concept and literally billions of people. And what about love? What am I supposed to understand when you tell me that you love me? What is that one little concept supposed to do for me? Concepts are the graveyards of perception because they're both empty and loaded. They're empty. What I mean by love has everything to do with what love means to me. And that in return has everything to do with my experiences, which are mute, fleeting, but also the very stuff of my life. To anyone who grew up without love and affection, how can a little empty concept possibly teach anything? But concepts are also loaded. They come to us with an oversized baggage of connotations, cultural prejudices, metaphysical assumptions, and other traces of their circulation. And as such, they acquire a strange power over us. If we're not careful, we end up putting the cart of the concept before the horse of experience. Love means a lot of things. Some people think God is love. Others love their dogs. Still others think all we need is love, that love is the solution to all our problems. As for me, I love rock and roll, and ice cream, and my wife. But love also means nothing at all, unless we make it mean something. Otherwise, it's a glamorous shell without any substance. We think it puts us on a path to bliss. We end up getting disciplined and regulated. In any society, there are moral norms and social regulations that check the transgressive powers of passion. That, incidentally, is why we never stop hearing sage advice on love. How not to get carried away, how to be cautious, how to watch out for that lizard, and stay clear of heartache. Well, I beg to differ. To invoke caution against passion because we can get hurt is like advising us to not live because life is full of suffering. That kind of faint-heartedness is the surest way to never learn anything, including what that little concept might possibly mean for us. So, what's the conclusion? What are we supposed to do? I think it's a very good idea to watch out for that baggage that we did not necessarily bargain for. And I think it's even a better idea to hang on to the void at the heart of the concept, because that's where our freedom lies. If we don't want to get fooled and end up taking the script for the real thing, we need to be courageous enough to live and learn and substantiate that void of love with the real stuff of our lives. True, we love life, Nietzsche declared, not because we're used to living, but because we're used to loving. There's always some madness in love, but there is also always some reason in madness. That is to say, you tame the madness, you choke the love, and you also kill the reason why you were going mad in the first place. If you ask my advice, don't ask anybody's advice. Just let the madness roll and be a fool for nothing other than love. I want to end with a poem which, among all the poems I've read, stands out by itself above any other. It's by Erich Fried, the German poet, and it is titled, "It Is What It Is." It's nonsense, says reason. It is what it is, says love. It's bad luck, says calculation. It's nothing but pain, says fear. It's hopeless, says insight. It is what it is, says love. It's ridiculous, says pride. It's reckless, says caution. It's impossible, says experience. It is what it is, says love. Thank you, and thank you for bearing with me.